The Indiana Fever could be on the verge of a historic transition. There's a name most Fever fans don't recognize yet, but he may soon become the most powerful figure in this franchise's future. He's a multi-billionaire with deep Indiana roots. He's already invested hundreds of millions into this organization, and there's a succession path quietly built that could give him control the moment Herb Simon steps away. His name is Steven Rales. But to understand why that matters, you have to understand what Herb Simon created and how close it all came to disappearing. You have to go back to 1983 and a decision that saved basketball in Indiana. Herb Simon's story doesn't begin with wealth. It begins with work. He was born in Brooklyn in 1934 to a modest family. Nothing was handed to him. No inheritance. No shortcut. Just discipline, vision, and a willingness to build something from nothing. Alongside his brother Mal, he started what would become Simon Property Group, acquiring parcels of land, developing retail centers, and expanding one project at a time. By the early 1980s, they had built a successful business, but they were far from the billionaires history would later make them. Then came 1983. And in Indiana, basketball was in danger. The Indiana Pacers were on the brink. The franchise was losing money at an unsustainable rate. Ownership wanted out. Quiet negotiations were happening behind the scenes. The possibility of relocation wasn't just a rumor. It was real. Indianapolis, a city defined by basketball, was at risk of losing its NBA team entirely. For fans who lived through it, the tension of that moment never faded. Herb Simon stepped in. He and Mel purchased the Pacers for $11 million. At the time, critics called it a gamble. The team wasn't competitive. The market was considered small. The NBA hadn't yet become the global powerhouse it is today. But Simon wasn't chasing profit. He was protecting something bigger. He made a commitment to Indiana, to its identity, to its love for the game. He moved to Indianapolis. He invested not just money, but presence. Through losing seasons, front office changes, and financial downturns, he stayed. Decade after decade, he stayed. Then in 1999, another opportunity arrived. The WNBA was expanding, and new franchises would only be awarded to cities that could prove real demand. The requirement was steep, 5,500 season ticket commitments before a team would even be approved. Indianapolis wanted in. But convincing thousands of people to invest in a brand new women's professional basketball league, in a market that had never experienced it, was a massive challenge. Simon didn't pass it off to a marketing department, he did it himself. One by one, meeting by meeting, he sold the vision. By the end of the campaign, he personally accounted for 4,500 of those ticket commitments. That's over 80% of the total requirement. One owner, carrying the entire launch effort on his own shoulders because he believed the league deserved to exist in Indiana. That effort gave birth to the Indiana Fever, operating under Pacers Sports and Entertainment, the structure that would unite both franchises under one roof. But belief doesn't guarantee success. The Fever's early years were difficult. Their inaugural season ended with a 9-23 record. Attendance was inconsistent. Media coverage was minimal. The city hadn't yet embraced the team the way Simon hoped it would. And behind closed doors, the financial reality was growing more serious each year. By 2009, ownership had to confront the truth. The Fever were losing money. The product on the court wasn't translating into ticket sales. And a stark message was delivered internally: improve performance, improve attendance, or the future of the franchise in Indianapolis would be in jeopardy. It was that close. And then came the player who changed everything. Tamika Catchings wasn't just talented. She was transformational. Drafted in 2001, she missed her entire rookie season recovering from a torn ACL. But when she returned, she became the heartbeat of the franchise. Defensive dominance. Leadership. Relentless effort. Over the next decade, she became a 5-time Defensive Player of the Year, a league MVP, and the face of the organization. More importantly, she chose to stay. In an era where stars could move freely, Catchings committed her entire career to Indiana. And in 2012, she delivered the moment the franchise had been waiting for, a WNBA championship. The Fever stood at the top of the league. And Herb Simon, who had protected the team through its most fragile years, watched it all unfold from courtside. For longtime fans, that title wasn't just a win. It was validation, but success didn't last forever. When Catchings retired in 2016, the team entered another decline. The wins disappeared. The standings dropped. By 2022, the Fever finished 5-31, one of the worst records in the league. The arena that once pulsed with energy grew quiet again. Attendance dipped. National attention faded. The franchise felt like it had slipped back into the shadows, and at the same time, time itself was becoming a factor. Herb Simon was approaching 90 years old. Leadership responsibilities had gradually shifted to his son, Steven Simon, who took on more day-to-day control within Pacers sports and entertainment. The organization was stable, but it wasn't thriving. Not yet. Then came a moment that changed everything. The 2024 WNBA draft. On April 15, in Brooklyn, the Fever selected Caitlin Clark with the first overall pick, and overnight, the trajectory of the entire franchise changed. What happened after Caitlin Clark arrived wasn't gradual. It was immediate. Before she played a single professional minute, arenas across the league were selling out. Opposing teams moved games into larger venues just to handle the demand. National broadcasts saw viewership numbers the WNBA hadn't seen in decades. The Indiana Fever went from rebuilding project to the center of the sports world in a matter of months. The business impact was just as dramatic. Merchandise sales surged. Sponsorship deals expanded. Media rights negotiations accelerated. The entire league benefited from the attention, but the Fever were at the center of it all. A franchise that had struggled to fill seats was now leading the WNBA in attendance and driving national conversation. Inside the organization, the transformation was just as clear. Infrastructure investments increased. Staffing expanded. Facilities were upgraded. What had once been a small market operation began to resemble a major professional sports enterprise, and for Herb Simon, now 90 years old, it was the culmination of everything he had worked for. He had saved the team. He had built the foundation. He had endured the losing seasons. And he had lived long enough to see the franchise become one of the most valuable properties in women's sports. But as the organization surged forward, a quieter question started to emerge: what happens next? Simon had stepped back from day-to-day business responsibilities. His decades-long career leading Simon Property Group had officially ended. Leadership within Pacers sports and entertainment was already transitioning to the next generation. The future of ownership wasn't an abstract question anymore. It was a timeline, and that's where Steven Rales enters the picture. Rales is not a celebrity owner. He doesn't chase headlines. But his track record is unmistakable. Raised in Indiana, educated at DePauw University, he went on to co-found Danaher Corporation, a company that grew from a modest investment vehicle into a global powerhouse worth hundreds of billions of dollars. His approach has always been consistent. Identify undervalued assets. Invest deeply. Build infrastructure. Think long-term, and over the past several years, he has quietly applied that same strategy to Pacers sports and entertainment. First, a minority stake. Then a larger investment. By late 2023, Rales had acquired approximately 20% of the organization, investing more than $500 million in total. At the time, the valuation reflected a stable but modest sports enterprise. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and the value of the Fever alone began to skyrocket. Within roughly 18 months, the franchise's estimated valuation more than tripled. Expansion teams entering the WNBA began paying record fees. New media rights deals injected billions into the league's future revenue stream. The Fever became one of the most commercially valuable teams in the entire sport, and Rales was already positioned inside. More importantly, the structure of his investment reportedly includes a pathway to majority control if the Simon family ever chooses to sell. That's not a passive stake. That's strategic positioning. It's the kind of move that signals long-term intent. So what would his ownership actually mean? History offers clues. At Danaher, Rales built growth by modernizing operations, investing in technology, and scaling brands globally. Applied to a sports franchise, that could mean upgraded facilities, expanded international marketing, enhanced player development systems, and a much larger commercial footprint. The Fever already have momentum. What they lack is the fully built infrastructure to match it. Their new dedicated practice facility, part of a league-wide push toward professional-grade environments, isn't even scheduled to open until 2027. The runway for growth is still wide open. Under Rales, that growth could accelerate. There is a version of the future where the Indiana Fever become not just a successful WNBA team, but a global sports brand. A destination franchise. A model organization. The kind of team that sets the standard for how women's professional sports can operate at the highest level. But that future depends on one thing: ownership. Herb Simon built this franchise on loyalty, stability, and commitment to Indiana. Those values ensured the team never left. They ensured the Fever survived when they were at their weakest. That legacy is secure, but the next chapter may require a different kind of vision. A different kind of scale, and right now, all the pieces are in place. The Fever are at their highest valuation in history. The league is entering a new financial era. The star at the center of it all is just beginning her professional career. And the investor with a clear path to control has already committed hundreds of millions to be part of it, which means the future of the Indiana Fever may not be a question of if it changes hands. Only when Herb Simon carried this franchise when it had nothing. He put his own reputation and resources on the line to keep basketball alive in Indiana. He backed the Indiana Fever when few believed it would work. He stood through empty seats, losing seasons, and uncertain futures. He earned the moment this team is living in right now. But at 90 years old, with the organization more valuable than it has ever been, with the league entering a new financial era, and with Caitlin Clark turning the spotlight brighter than ever, the next era is already forming. And Steven Rales may be closer than anyone realizes to leading it.